So welcome everybody. Great to see so many faces. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's wonderful to have you here. This is a place you want to be every Monday from 3 to 4 because a lot of cool stuff happens. And today is no exception. Squishy and Aaron. Yep, plenty. Lots up front. So the Mitchell Center is a kind of a gathering and meeting place where we take the best of a university like the University of Maine and the needs of the real world. I think Ron Calhoun always objects when I talk about us not living in the real world. Maybe she's right, but sometimes it's kind of worth thinking about what it means to leave campus and go out into the world and help solve problems in that part of the world. And I think this is a place where we often try to figure out how to do that, and we don't just figure it out by talking to ourselves, but we try to talk to the people who are out there on the front lines of problem solving about how to do this. And so today's a great example of that, as I'll tell you in a second, in terms of our speaker's background. We don't just want to kind of talk about this. We're trying to train the next generation of problem solvers that come out of the university. And so we even have a group of students who come to these classes or these talks every Monday from 3 to 4. And my co-instructor, Bree Berry, kind of shepherds them along through all of this. So who in the room right now is part of the Seminar on Sustainability Solutions? Yeah, so thanks for being here, and I know there's lots of other students as well some of who've already taken this class. So, and come to think of it, I think we're joined by the Mitchell Center's branch office in southwestern U.S., right on the Tucson-Mexico border in the Sonoran Desert. Sarah Loudon is with us too. Taking that class, believe it or not. So, the Nature Conservancy. To whom is that a familiar name? A lot, but not everybody. I got involved in it when I was a kid, and have been a member for a long time. It has deep roots in Maine. In fact, you could almost trace the very origins of TNC, as Andy will tell you in a second. They talk a lot about pragmatic solutions, which, if you noticed as you came in the building, we talk about sustainability solutions. They have a new paper out in the fall issue of Frontiers of Ecology and the Environment basically about the science of sustainability as TNC sees it. So again, kind of bringing together people and nature, which is certainly how we think about coupled systems and solving problems. World's largest NGO focused on conservation, grew out of the Ecological Society of America that I've been a member of for close to half a century. They've been having meetings on campus today earlier and tomorrow to kind of really brainstorm about how to work together more closely, and you'll hear a lot more about that. So Andy Cutko is the person who's going to give this talk, a wonderful guy. He has an undergraduate degree, Bachelor's of Arts. I like the arts part in biology because that's exactly what I have, Andy. I'm not sure what it really counts for, but we both like being outdoors, I guess is one thing to say. From Williams College and a Master's in Forestry from Duke University. This guy knows Maine's natural areas better than almost anybody. I think in his little bio it said something about he'd been out in the field on every page of the Delorme Atlas. I haven't made it to all those pages yet, but I'm hoping he can point me in the right direction. He's an expert in biodiversity inventory, co-wrote an amazing book, Natural Landscapes of Maine, a guide to natural communities and ecosystems, but he's taken what was a very deep role for over 20 years at Department of Conservation in Maine, and now he's the Director of Science at TNC, and one of the great things that he's doing there is to help us think about how we can all work together, and you're going to hear him tell that story right now. Please join me in welcoming Andy.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here at the university. And I guess before I say anything about the Nature Conservancy or any of the work that I do, I just want to say, go Pats! For all those who stayed up last night. And you'll be happy to know that driving up here on the interstate, the electronic signs say, drive with both hands so you can view all 6 rings. A little inside Tom Brady. And that's a true story. That actually said that on the interstate. As David said, I unfortunately was not a graduate of the University of Maine, but I want to say I came really close to coming here. It was many years ago in the 1980s, and I was a high school senior, and I was definitely interested in forestry and forest ecology, so Maine was on my list. It was the first place I applied to, and it was the first place I was accepted. And I came up here on a kind of an overcast, sort of a muggy day like today in February. And back in those days, the mill from, I think it was the James River Mill, there was a certain wind blowing out of the northeast. And I took a few steps out of the car and I said, okay, I'm moving on. However, if I had known then what I know now about what a great program you have here at Orono, and perhaps had the wind been blowing in a different direction, it's funny how fate ends up guiding your life. Anyway, I'm here now, and my graduate school work, as David said, was at Duke, and, well, I'm a college basketball fan, so enough said there. All right, TNC, I know a number of you raised your hands and indicated that you know something about the Nature Conservancy. Most of you actually did. Probably what you don't know is that we do have a fairly long history working with the University of Maine. There are a number of folks who have been board members in the past. Matt Kunter was on our board for a number of years. Bucky Owen was on our board for 10 years. John Daigle for a number of years. George Jacobson was our chair until a few years ago. Heather Leslie, who's the head of the Darling Marine Center, is on our board and is in the room today. And Steve Shaler, I'm not sure if Steve is here today or not, but Steve, who is in the School of Forestry, is currently on our board as well. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'll start out by giving you a little bit more background on the Nature Conservancy, who we are and what we do. Specifically, I'll talk about some of the things we have learned by developing a new strategic plan, so what's new with TNC. I'll talk about the benefits of collaborating around research. We just had a great discussion with some fisheries and marine biologists about this topic, so I'll share some thoughts on that. I'll talk about some current and recent collaborative projects, giving you some examples of some hands-on on-the-ground projects that we've done together. We'll talk about our own research priorities to perhaps promote some conversation towards the end of the session today about moving forward with additional research, and that's one of the things we were talking about earlier today. And then just wrap up with some next steps. And I hope to do this in an amount of time where we should have at least 15 to 20 minutes for discussion towards the end. So when I think about TNC, and David alluded to this a little bit, we are a global organization, conservation organization. What I think distinguishes us from a number of others is that we are, in fact, truly science-based. Science is at the core of just about everything we do and influences all of our decisions and strategies. And I'm a little biased, of course, because I'm the director of science, but that's over the course of 60 years, it's really been played a major role in everything that we do. As David said, we are, this says one of the world, but I'll take his word for it, that we are the world's largest organization working to protect ecologically important lands. And it says lands and waters for nature and people. And the nature and people piece is really a little bit newer for us. We've been around for 60 years, but we've been focused primarily as an organization on conserving biodiversity. But we're really learning now that to effectively do that, we need to incorporate human dimensions in all our work. Understand more how people think and what makes people act. So connecting people and nature is a much stronger part of our work these days. Our bread and butter, though, has been land conservation, and globally we've protected almost 120 million acres of land, thousands of miles of rivers, and we're involved in more than 100 different marine conservation projects. We are active in more than 70 different countries across the hemisphere, so we are truly a global organization. The Maine chapter was founded by Rachel Carson. Show of hands for how many people recognize that name. Excellent. So not everyone is over the age of 40 who recognizes Rachel Carson's name. Author of Silent Spring. And she and a number of other scientists more than 50 years ago were concerned about the environmental degradation and just some of the other impacts that they were seeing, and wanted to be hands-on and do something about it. It was really the first, I'll use this term occasionally, translational ecology, or basically translating academic research and scientific focus into hands-on, on-the-ground conservation. So that's what Rachel Carson was all about, and she founded Maine's chapter of the Nature Conservancy back in 1956. The core of what we focused on for the majority of our time in Maine has been land conservation. We are now the 12th largest landowner in the state. We own close to 300,000 acres ourselves, and I'll talk about some of those lands in just a minute here, but working collaboratively with land trusts, with the state, with federal agencies and others, we protected about 1.8 million acres of land in the state. In all, there are about 4 million acres of land conserved, so roughly 40% of the amount of land that's been conserved in Maine has been conserved either directly by us or by us in partnership with others. So we have a pretty big footprint in the state. This will be my scenic tour of special places that we protected, and this can be, in fact, an audience participation session. So when I mention this place or you recognize the picture, just raise your hand if you've been there. So, wow. So, yeah, without even mentioning it. So this is Great Loss Island, Washington County. Anyone else been to Great Loss? Okay, a few of you have. This was one of our earliest preserves, and it's just an outstanding example of coastal headlands and maritime peatlands or bogs and fens in Washington County. This one, Big Reed Forest. How many have been to Big Reed? Okay, a couple of you have. It's not very well known, but among ecologists, hardcore ecologists, it's well known as perhaps the largest area of old-growth forest remaining in New England, at roughly 5,000 acres. This was one of our earliest acquisitions as well. So home to old-growth forest, Arctic char, old-growth cedar, and old-growth ecologist. And I guess I should clarify that means ecologists who study old growth, not ecologists. Anyway, you get it. So Big Reed is an absolutely special place if you ever have a chance to get there. The Debskineg Lakes. Okay, I would guess that more of you have probably been to this property than you might think. This is about 40,000 acres in the shadows of Mount Katahdin, just south and west of the Golden Road, and it's on either side of the Appalachian Trail. So if you've hiked the 100-mile wilderness, you've been on our Debskineg Lakes property. It's a magnificent piece of land with remote brook trout ponds and patches of old-growth forest. And just extensive, really has as much of, if anywhere, a place of wilderness feel in Maine. One of our more recent acquisitions is around number 5 and number 6 mountains in western Maine. This is called our Luthold Preserve west of Addian Pond in Jackman. For those who have heard of the New England Clean Energy Connect power line project, it's going to go right adjacent to this piece of land, but pretty spectacular in its own right. Certainly, I think the biggest and perhaps best known of our acquisitions has been our St. John property, which was acquired roughly 20 years ago, almost to the month. And it was really, at the time, it was the largest acquisition in the Nature Conservancy's history. So it was really pushing the envelope in terms of the scale of work that we did. Clearly, the river itself and the associated rare plants and fisheries and habitats were the main target, but it also allowed us to really jump in the game in terms of active forest management. We now own the property. When we purchased it, was about 185,000 acres. We own and manage all of that still, but about 100,000 acres of that is actively managed woodlands. And so it's allowed us to engage in conversations with other land managers throughout the state, participate on the CFRU and a number of other ways, just be integrated with the forest community in ways that we wouldn't have otherwise. It was also actually a great opportunity. Dan Harrison's here, and in some of the early years, we actually did a bunch of work around lynx and marten and landscape scale habitat management, trying to use some of the work that's coming out of Dan's shop and actually apply it on the ground. Again, this concept of translational ecology. So I will say that in the earlier years of TNC's existence, our land conservation tended to be a little bit more opportunistic. That means it depends on where the donors were or where the opportunities for acquisition were. In the last 5 to 10 years in particular, we have become much more proactive and science-based about targeting lands. This is a web-based tool, so if you were to Google Resilient Lands Mapping Tool, you could find this. It's accessible to anyone, and it uses a combination of biophysical features and remote imagery, looking at landscape connectivity, and thinking about the resilience of lands in relation to climate change over the long term, and how can we protect the places that will be most resilient to climate change. So the point here is that we become much more systematic and forward-thinking in terms of using applied science to conserve lands. So I want to shift gears here. That's just a little bit of background and context of the Conservancy. Recently, we spent a fair amount of time working on a strategic plan for the next 5 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. We've come up with 6 different program areas. Conserving the future of forests. I've obviously talked a lot about forest conservation already. Restoring free-flowing rivers. When we got involved with the Penobscot River Project, which I'll talk a little bit more about 10 years ago, that was really a launching point for us to be much more actively involved in aquatic restoration, fisheries habitat, fisheries management, stream connectivity, all of those things statewide. And so we've been very active over the last 10 years in restoring free-flowing rivers. Ocean management. We do have a full-time marine science person, and we're working on new technologies, new fisheries technologies to become much more selective about the catch. We're also working on monitoring, electronic monitoring, so that we can get a sense of what the fishermen, what they're actually catching, is matching up with what the regulators are saying are the fishing stocks. If you know anything about fisheries management, you know there are often some pretty significant disconnects there. So we're doing what we can to install electronic monitoring on fishing vessels to try to bridge that gap. Collaborating around the world. We have the guy who sits in the cubicle next to me at the Conservancy just got back from Gabon this weekend, where he was working on hydrologic modeling of the whole country to try to figure out where the least impactful places dams should go in. We have a staff on board who's working on a water fund project in Nairobi. Josh Roy, who works for the Conservancy and has joined me for the day and is in the back of the room, does a lot of work on something called World Fish Migration Day. So raising the profile of the importance of river connectivity and fish migration globally. Josh is also involved in a number of projects looking at the impact of dams all across Europe. So we have a number of different global projects as well. Inspiring climate action. If any of you have followed the elections and paid attention to what's happening in the news, you know that our current governor is a lot more progressive about climate strategies than our former governor. And so we see great opportunities here for expanding solar and wind energy, both land-based and offshore. With that, however, comes some questions and potential conflicts. You know, what does the build-out of solar energy look like if we were to create, let's say, 50% of Maine's energy from solar? How many acres would that take, and where would those acres go, and what would they be displacing? So we're thinking a lot about this question of energy siting as renewable energy gets a much higher profile in the state. But really what I wanted to talk mostly about today is deploying cutting-edge science and the work that we're doing around science within the Conservancy here in Maine. So I do work with a team of individuals. We're called the science team within the Maine chapter. We've got roughly, our overall staff is maybe 30 to 35-ish, and about 10 of those are on the science team. So we're applied scientists like Josh, who's working on river and stream connectivity. We have folks who are actually working on land management, so stewardship of the 300,000 acres of land that we own and manage. And then we have 3 folks who just do GIS analysis and mapping. So that's the science team. And of course, again, I'm biased, but I think that science is really the root of everything we do. Science informs all of our other strategies. And our goal, as you can see here, is to develop innovative ecological and social science to inform solutions to Maine's conservation challenges and to measure success. It's this concept of translational ecology, translating all the great science and research that happens in places like Orono and making it applied on the ground so that it's informing our conservation decisions. There's a couple other pieces of this language that I want to just highlight here. One is social science. Historically, the Conservancy hasn't done a lot with social science, particularly in the first several decades. We were pretty exclusively focused on biodiversity, but particularly over the last decade, we've recognized that in order to be most effective with our conservation decisions and strategies, we need to understand those human dimensions. What drives people to be either supportive or opposed to conservation, and how can we influence those drivers? So social science is one piece that's relatively new for us and is highlighted in our strategic plan. And then measuring our success. For those who are on the board, you'll recognize this is something we have talked a lot about in the past, and frankly, we've struggled to do. So we want to try to become much more just consistent and repeatable and quantitative in the ways that we can measure our conservation actions and our outcomes. So those are a couple important themes. So let's talk about collaboration here. You know, what do we have to gain from collaboration? Well, from the Conservancy's perspective, you know, I think we have one person on staff who has a PhD, but we don't come into it with a lot of academic training necessarily, or quantitative analysis, or the types of things that the university can provide. You know, so we really look to the university to provide that academic horsepower to analyze huge data sets, ask complex questions, answer hopefully complex questions, and bring that, again, that academic and research expertise that we don't have. Research credibility obviously is something that's important to all of you here who are on the faculty and students as well. It's also important to us. We probably don't think about publishing as much as you guys do, but clearly being able to publish a paper and talking about our collaboration with the university brings us a lot more credibility in conservation circles. Empowering young conservationists. Obviously, we want to recruit and empower and enable that next generation of conservationists, and I'm hoping that many of you are in the room would fit that category. So, obviously, working with not just UMaine, but you know, Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, all the schools in Maine, gives us an opportunity to just create you know, the future conservationists of the world. And then access to funding. And this, as I mentioned, will work both ways. There are funding streams that the university has access to that we don't. Conversely, there are funding streams, philanthropy, private donors, etc., that we have access to that you don't. And so that can work in both ways. What does the university have to gain out of working with us? Well, again, you've seen this term now a couple times, translational ecology. What we can bring to the table is real-world problems. You know, we don't work on theory. We work on situations that you know, have boots on the ground and real conservation decisions. Where do you want to remove that culvert? How much is it going to cost to fix that dam? How can we use the Lynx and Martin to apply to our information, to apply to our 100,000 acres of managed land in northwest Maine? So it's truly translational ecology in the best sense. Social ecological systems, very few of the things that we study don't involve people. And in other words, just about every problem that we're looking at has some constituency or some decision makers or some political implications. So social ecological systems are things that we can also provide some real world grounding in. We are also well connected to different parts of the conservation community. We work closely with Maine Audubon, Natural Resources Council of Maine, conservation law foundations. So we just have a pretty good sense of what different priorities are among different sectors of the conservation community. And then obviously access to funding is something, again, that works both ways. So we talked about this a little bit in our meeting earlier today, but what does collaboration look like? You know, there's really no singular solution. There's no one model necessarily. On the one end of the spectrum, it can be just communicating, brainstorming about different ideas. Sean Fravor came down to my office maybe 2 weeks ago, and we just chatted about cedar. I've spent a lot of my time walking around cedar swamps in the state, so I have, you know, not a lot of academic training, but I just have a sense of kind of what's going on, what's going on ecologically with cedar, and where are some good places to find different types of cedar swamps and seepage forests. So that's, you know, one end of the spectrum is just communicating about different issues, just brainstorming. At the other end of the spectrum is I'll talk about the Penobscot River project, where we've been truly integrated in just about every manner in the research and monitoring that's going on with the restoration of the Penobscot River. So again, no singular solution here, but there's the full range and spectrum of collaboration possibilities. And I'm sure there are social scientists who would probably put it in a much more sophisticated way than that, but that's my take on it. So there are probably almost 10 different projects that I can think of where we're currently involved with the university. I want to highlight 4 over the span of the next 10 or 15 minutes, so I'll touch on each of these. One on long-term forest monitoring. The caption of this particular picture here, if I had a caption, I think would be how many PhDs does it take to determine whether a tree is alive or not? Clearly, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know how many of those guys have PhDs. So I'll talk about a forest monitoring project involving ecological reserves. I'll talk about the Penobscot River monitoring project. I'll talk a little bit about a floodplain modeling. This is kind of a techie GIS project looking at flood storage and floodplains for ecosystem services. And then I'll touch for a few minutes on a social science project involving the Katahdin region, working with Adam and his team. So this project, the first one, is near and dear to my heart because I'm a forest ecologist by training and was actively involved in this project both in my current position and in my prior job working for the state. The state and the Nature Conservancy together have about 175,000 acres of long-term ecological reserves. These are basically places that have been set aside either by TNC or by the Maine legislature as hands-off places in terms of timber harvesting. They do allow recreation, fishing and hunting for the most part, but they're essentially research controls to be monitoring forest change long-term. We've got collectively over 1,000 plots on these ecological reserves spanning back for 20 years, and this is the classic case of we've got a ton of data. We don't really have the expertise or the time to dig deeply into it. And so we connected with Aaron and his team, and they worked to do an analysis of not only how ecological reserves are different than Maine's managed forests, but also how ecological reserves are changing over time. And we got a data paper in the journal Ecology out of that. Just to give you a little insight into some of the results, really no big surprise. Ecological reserves are actually really different than Maine's managed forests. So we're comparing reserves to the managed forests using, for the forest geeks out there, the FIA or forest inventory and analysis data. Not surprisingly, all of these metrics, sort of standard metrics of forest structure, were significantly more in not only for the forest in general, but in both beech, birch, maple, and spruce fir types. This is only a different color because it wasn't statistically significant. All the others were. I do like this picture because it reminds me that I was, in fact, once a field ecologist back in the day, and I did know how to measure trees at one time. So this was in an area that has since been acquired by the state near Baxter State Park. That was one of the bigger white pine trees I've measured. So one of the other cool things we did with this project is we not only compared Maine's managed forests with ecological reserves, but we also had data on that 5,000 acre old growth site that's a big reed forest, and using data from Sean Fravor, who's probably cored more trees than any human I've ever met, many of them at Big Reed Forest. We were able to compare those two things with Big Reed and show that Big Reed Forest is really a game changer. I mean, the amount of dead wood, just large dead trees, very large trees, etc., is really an order or orders of magnitude more than our ecological reserves. So it sort of puts the ecological reserves in context. So that's the forest piece. The Penobscot River piece, as many of you probably know, we've been involved with the university since about 2006, when the Penobscot River Restoration Trust got off the ground. The Restoration Trust was looking at removal of two dams, the Great Works Dam and the Vesey Dam. I can't remember which was 2012 and which was 2013, but those both came out. And there was a fish passage put in at the Howland Dam. And so we wanted to get a sense of baseline conditions before these dams came out, and then monitoring after the removal of the dams at a 5-year interval and a 10-year interval. So this is a really robust project with federal funding, lots of involvement from both the Conservancy and the university. And Penobscot River Ecological Monitoring Framework was established with a steering committee. It was actually established before some of those dams came out, and we're monitoring a whole bunch of different things here. Joe Zidlewski and a number of others are involved. Joe's been heavily involved, and you can see fish passage, fish behavior with sturgeon, food and web dynamics. Matt Hunter's had some involvement in here. And so this has been just, of all the different research collaborations that we're involved in, this is probably the longest running and the most robust, I would say. So in addition to the priorities that were identified by the framework around the Penobscot River, there are a bunch of other pieces as well. Passage at hydroelectric facilities, eel phenology, riverine birds, sea lamprey ecology, all of those involve some university representatives. And then I just saw this morning an email that talked about zooplankton and a collaborative project between the University of Maine, University of Southern Maine, and TNC potentially around zooplankton. So there are all sorts of different ways that we're working together on monitoring the Penobscot. And just to give you, if you haven't followed the work of the Penobscot restoration, the results have been just absolutely incredible and incredibly heartwarming for all of those who were involved for many, many years. These graphs show river herring returns in Blackman Stream, which is just one tributary, and the larger Penobscot River overall. The last bar there is 2018. You can see close to 3 million fish returned. And the numbers went from virtually zero in 2012 and 2013 when those dams were removed. So it's incredibly gratifying to see this kind of result. We've connected more than 2,000 miles of rivers and streams in the Penobscot River watershed. And this is one of the better areas where I think we've done in terms of measuring our success. And that's largely because of our collaboration with the university. It's also, as I mentioned, just our collaboration with the university around the Penobscot has kicked off our freshwater restoration work statewide. So a lot of the lessons we learned cutting our teeth in the Penobscot, we have now taken statewide, and we've now got we're even working on much smaller rivers and streams, and Josh and his field crews have collected data literally on thousands of fish barriers across the state. And we're starting work on prioritizing which ones of those should be removed to improve connectivity. So that's the Penobscot River work. Shifting gears, I'll talk about our first deep dive into ecosystem services, and this is the floodplain modeling project with Shalene, who I think was not able to make it today, but Shalene Jane has been heavily involved in this. This work began out of a report in 2013 from Steve Colgan at the University of Southern Maine, which was looking at the economics of natural and built infrastructure for water resources. In other words, looking at wetlands, floodplains, and forests and their values in maintaining water flows and clean water. That report was instrumental in the policy arena in creating, in 2014, something called a water bond, which generated millions of dollars for culvert removal and stream connectivity in Maine. But as a result of that report, we started thinking about just drilling deeper into this question of ecosystem services and actually trying to be able to quantify the amount of water that certain flood systems and watersheds can retain. And this work draws heavily on LIDAR. So we worked in a couple different watersheds in southern Maine. The Presumpscot is one that is one of the more highly developed in terms of population watersheds in the state, and so it's certainly of great interest to us. That I think they'd had a couple very significant floods in the last 10 years, and as you know from climate change work, our frequency of 100-year floods is about once every 5 years now, so this kind of work is really relevant. And so it's pretty technical stuff that I'm not going to really even scratch the details of, but using LIDAR technology, which can assess depths to very, very precise levels, we're able to now try to create models of what the volume is that different rivers and floodplain systems can store. And then when we couple that with hydrologic models of the 10 or 50 or 100-year event, we'll be able to not only map areas that are likely to flood, but get some sense of the volume of storage so we can account for that economically in terms of protecting downstream communities. Just out of curiosity, my coworker Dan Coker gave a talk on this about a year ago. Did anyone actually see that talk? It was much more detailed. Yeah, so a few of you did. Great. Using LIDAR, we're also able to create web-based tools like this one. This is a coastal resilience tool where we're looking at sea level rise and tidal marshes and trying to predict with different 1 foot, 2 foot, 6 foot sea level rises which areas are likely to be inundated, which has both ecological implications and also implications in terms of our built infrastructure. This is the last one that I'll talk about, and again, this is a project that we've worked on with Adam in the Katahdin region of Maine, looking at indicators of economic and social resilience. So why are we interested in this case? Well, clearly the Millinocket, the Katahdin region, is adjacent to the largest core of conserved lands in the state, extending from the new national monument, Baxter State Park. This is our land here, Debskineg Lakes Wilderness, AMC lands down here along the 100-mile wilderness of the Appalachian Trail. And in fact, regionally, if you look at the map on the right, that's the Nature Conservancy's map of resilient and connected lands. Some of our science mapping in the Millinocket Katahdin region is not quite a bullseye within that, but certainly connected to a very, very large area of intact and resilient lands. So we're clearly concerned about the future trajectory of both human use and development and forest products use in the area. And we recognize that essentially that healthy communities are healthy places. This is using a token of social science language here, but our theory of change is that connecting conservation with community and economy can improve the quality of life, change the dialogue, and ultimately, we hope at least, improve support for conservation. And we're envisioning a region where all of these things can coexist. Conservation, timber harvesting, outdoor recreation, and connections to the outdoors, where all those things are vital to the economy and quality of place. So the question is, if the Nature Conservancy is investing in sort of community change here, how do we measure that? And that's where we came to the university and Adam's team and just worked on developing some baseline indicators of community, when I say community, people community resilience. So we've developed a lengthy list of indicators here: social, economic, housing and infrastructure, etc. And there's been a couple phases involved in this project, but these are ideally things that we'll be able to measure over time, so that not only the Nature Conservancy but all the partners involved who are developing a long-term vision for the Katahdin region can see and quantify, what the impacts of that work are over time. So that's, I think, the last of the specific projects that I'll talk about. I'm going to step up now to more the 30,000 foot level and just share some general research priorities, specific core ecological interests here, detection of long-term species habitat trends and cause-effect relationships, impacts of climate change on species and ecological systems, and something we just talked about in the fisheries session today, harnessing new technologies. That's one area where we really look to the university to bring things to fruition. Is things like eDNA, the applications of LiDAR and forest mapping and river mapping. We're going to acquire a drone. How do we use drones for measuring and monitoring forests and other systems over time? So these are a couple core ecological interests. Obviously, we have many more than that. In terms of social science and human dimensions, how do social, cultural, and ecological factors influence conservation outcomes? How can an improved understanding of human values and perceptions help us move the needle on conservation? And how can we achieve conservation outcomes that optimize benefits for both people and nature? And I think we're thinking about all of those questions in some manner in our work in the Katahdin region. But again, clearly this is an area that we don't internally have a lot of expertise on, and I think the university does, in particular the Mitchell Center. So this is a big area of growth and opportunity for us. Other opportunities for collaboration, just outside of the research realm. Dirigo Fellowships is something that Mac Hunter has created. Mac, do you want to just say something about the Dirigo Fellowship and maybe where it stands, or want me to say what I know and you can?
It's funding to support graduate students from developing countries, important caveat, to come to the University of Maine and undertake the kind of research that Andy's talking about.
And just getting up and off the ground, and I think hoping to start next semester, right?
We're looking for people now.
Yeah. Seasonal jobs and internships. As I mentioned at the outset, part of the Nature Conservancy's interest in this collaboration is just empowering and establishing a new generation of conservationists. So we do have every year seasonal jobs. Some of them tend to be more kind of April through October, but some of them are also during the field season. Serving on graduate committees. Most of us don't have PhDs, including myself, but as I understand it, we can serve on master's committees without PhDs, so that's a possibility. And I'm sure there are many, many others, some of which we touched on earlier today in our meeting. And just wrapping up here, thinking about the next steps to collaboration. We did have a meeting today with some faculty, a pretty good, engaging discussion with about a dozen folks, including a couple graduate students, to identify possible areas for collaboration around hydrology, water quality, fisheries. That's one combined meeting, in marine and coastal. That's all together. We have 2 meetings scheduled tomorrow, and one is in wildlife. I think the wildlife one is at 1, and the forest science meeting is at 10. So I hope a number of the faculty at least will be able to attend those. And it's really just an open discussion to explore our interest, the university's interest, and different opportunities for greater intersection. Further follow-up to narrow down a list of to a handful of key projects. My mind is already swelled with the hour and a half that we had today just on fisheries and coastal issues, so I'm sure we're going to come up with a lot of great ideas over these 2 days. However, I think we're not going to be able to fulfill and commit to doing as much as we'd want on every one of those. So we're going to, I think, probably focus on a few key projects that we can really make some significant headway on, and perhaps scale back or be involved in a lesser degree in some others. But that's going to be an active area of discussion. Participation in the NSF Research Trainee Program. I put out as a little temptation for maybe Adam or David to say something about, or right?
Yeah, so
Well,
this,
one real quick thing
yeah.
is to say that next Monday there will be a full talk
That's
from
right.
3 to 4 about this. So, but
yeah, so this is a NSF funded grant to basically create a research graduate program around conservation science, and so this year is getting off the ground. The first cohort of students will be coming in starting in the fall of 2019.
Thank you, Adam.
TNC is a member of steering committee, and also we're working to develop internship opportunities for graduate students to work directly with them as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think that is it, and I would just conclude by saying that we have had a really good and strong and solid relationship with the university for many years. So it certainly ain't broke, and there's nothing we need to fix. But at the same time, I think there are opportunities for new collaboration and in many different directions. Really, the sky's the limit. I was incredibly encouraged by the conversation we just had earlier today, and I'm sure I will be tomorrow as well. And so for those of you on the faculty or perhaps some others who've received the research collaboration list that was emailed around a few months ago, thanks very much for your input on that, and that's all being factored into these discussions. For those who haven't seen that list, come talk to me afterwards, and I might be able to share a hard copy of that. But I will end there. Looks like we've got about 15 minutes of time for comments, questions, discussion, and I would certainly invite anyone else who's worked with the Conservancy directly or indirectly over the last 10 years to chime in as well on thoughts or anything that I may have missed. Again, I'm relatively new to TNC, so open forum.
great. First, let's thank.
Thank you.
So let it fly.
Or you all want to enjoy the warmest day of the winter and actually get outside for the last hour of sunlight. So,
I have a question.
yes.
So you mentioned the water quality monitoring on the Penobscot River that Dan Cusners is leading.
Mm-hmm.
That focuses on conventional contaminants. Do you have any plans to move into toxic contaminants?
I'm so glad I brought Josh Roy today. Josh is our point person on the Penobscot, and I'm going to artfully defer that one to Josh.
Yeah, so our Penobscot monitoring really is our contracts to decide the water quality methods. Dan and his work. That's solely focused on the impact of dam removal on things like dissolved oxygen and conductivity and natural rivers that are there. It doesn't focus on contaminants, but from our work with the project all along, the contaminants, especially as stream that are in the pond, are a huge concern for the tribe. There's just fishing in the likely impact it's having on cancer rates. So it's something we have an interest on. We don't have any funding mechanisms, although it's into EPA and the there's funding for that.
EPA hasn't funded any work on the ponds or lakes. It's funded only work on the river.
Yeah, I was thinking the pond is part of the river, so get downstream.
Well, just like to encourage you, it would be a great area to move into, especially given the importance of sustenance fishing for the Penobscot Nation, which they can't realize right now because of the mercury contamination and the organochlorine contamination of the fish.
Great. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yep.
I'm not sure it's the same thing as I recall. I work for the Upward Bound Math Science Program. I'm the academic coordinator, and I'm blessed with putting together a group project every summer. Do you work at all with high school students? Do you reach out to them?
We have one program that's through the National Office of the Conservancy, and it's called LEAF. And Josh, do you remember what LEAF stands for?
Yeah, we used it for environmental action in the future. It's a program that, unfortunately, we just got a notice that it's been stopped.
Oh.
Many years of supporting high school inner city kids coming out to try jobs in the environment. Magnet schools in New York and Rhode Island and Pennsylvania and Italy. And
we should talk if there's a potential there for doing something with TNC, and particularly if there's a gap where we don't have the LEAF program anymore. I hadn't heard that, Josh. It's too bad.
Just last week.
Yeah. Huh.
I have lots of building collection experts working with it all.
Yeah. Well, we just had an interesting discussion about the pros and cons of citizen science. We didn't talk specifically about when the citizens were teenagers, but having 2 teenagers myself, I can imagine that there are pros and cons involved in that as well. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for this talk. I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about some of the opportunities for linking up with social science. In particular, I'm wondering about opportunities to study and shape some of the collaborative work that you're doing across, the TNC university boundary and with different communities that you're engaging with. You have social science that you're designing to support them.
Yeah, again, the Katahdin project is really our first foray into that, and so I think we're sort of learning by trial and error, and it's been really successful, I will say there. So there aren't any other projects through which we've done that scale of social science. One of the other ways that we talked about just earlier today that we're trying to measure our impact is in the Penobscot River, where we have an internal social scientist, and we did we're doing before and after dam removal impressions of local users on boating access and paddling and fishing and bird watching and their perception of water quality and all of those things. So the Penobscot one is that we haven't drawn on the university to date, but I think that we could potentially in the future. Another one that I think has a lot of opportunity for growth is that around coastal resilience. So I showed that image of the coastal resilience web tool looking at where marshes are likely to migrate, and we've also just created a social vulnerability tool for coastal areas that's looking at bridges and culverts and where a major storm could cut off access to a hospital or that kind of thing. We're really good at the technical side of the GIS and LiDAR side of developing the tools, and we're really lacking in how to get the tools out there and how to work with people to understand the tools and understand the limitations of rural communities to adapt to a pretty sophisticated web-based tool. So that's another one that comes to mind. Just another piece that occurs to me is getting people outdoors. We all know about nature deficit disorder, and historically the Nature Conservancy's lands have been used primarily as nature preserves. But we're thinking more and more about what we call internally flagship preserves. And so how can we connect with local communities to raise the awareness about our lands and get people from all walks of life out to be using our own lands to expose them to nature in ways that they might not otherwise be. There was something called the Land and Water Conservation Task Force, a private task force that was recently completed in Maine, looking at future directions for land conservation. And one of the things that it talked about, it had a number of different recommendations, but one of them was that we need more natural areas and access to public lands in close proximity to the coast and to our urban centers, so that people in Portland and Lewiston and Bangor even have an opportunity to, within 15 minutes, get onto a piece of nature. So anyway, that's something else we're thinking about, but also what is the kind of carrying cost of our land. And at a place called Saco Heath, for instance, you can't just tromp hundreds of kids out there because it's a heath with a boardwalk. And anyway, those are just a couple of different ideas of questions that occur to me, but I'm sure if we were to chat, you would bring to my attention dozens more.
It's all good starting points.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Josh.
Thanks for the talk, really interesting. You describe yourself as the 12th largest landowner in Maine.
Yes.
And I was wondering if TNC owns those outright, or are there any sort of community ownership models? And if so, could you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we own close to 300,000 acres of land outright, and we have not, in terms of our own ownership, developed or engaged in any kind of community model, community ownership model. We are interested in supporting that, though. At multiple scales, and I know a number of towns, smaller towns. The town of Falmouth, for instance, has done incredible things with their own town lands. But I think the concept of community forest is one that we definitely support. Whether TNC would actively, own that land and steward that land, we have some pretty significant obligations in terms of just managing the land that we own. But as a concept of community ownership for rural lands, it's definitely something we're supportive of. Yeah, good point.
Any other questions?
Other?
What do you think about the people you intend to recruit to your team over the next decade or person?
Well, the thing with the Nature Conservancy is no one ever leaves, right?
As your team grows, what kind of skills do those new employees need, either on the conservation science team or elsewhere in the conservancy?
Well, yeah. As one who is like a botanist and ecologist, and I would love to say that we love to get people with taxonomic skills because that's something that's, missing. But the reality is that the conservation landscape, I think, needs people who can do multiple things and bridge gaps between the hard science and the social sciences. And, I'm struck more and more with just the need for communication skills and partnership skills and people skills. It's taken me a while to develop them, so they don't come easy necessarily. But, I think that we're going to be looking for well-rounded people who may have some expertise in one specific area, but that can bridge a lot of the gaps that we've been talking about. What do you think? You're a board member, so.
I think we need people who have really good financial background
Mhm.
and the ability also to understand what different types of folks in different institutional settings need. So in keeping with what you're saying about people skills, but also understanding how different types of institutions work so that partnerships can be non-traditional as well as traditional.
Mhm.
And it would be great to have somebody who's a understory plants expert.
Yay! Mosses and lichens. Yay! Any final questions? Yes.
Do you have anyone on staff that is involved politically? How do you approach Augusta?
That's
Tell them
that's
where
a,
you were last week.
yeah. Well, no, so that's a funny question in a couple of regards. So we do have an external affairs person. I was actually in Augusta last week, testifying on behalf of our new Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, who I'm thrilled to announce is the first woman commissioner of IF&W ever, and also has academic training in wildlife, and just happens to be a great person. So yes, we do get involved in Augusta. Our external affairs are basically our government relations person for the last 19 years. Just left. His last day was on Friday, and he is now working for the Mills administration. Today is his first day as the natural resource advisor to Janet Mills. So that's a nice transition, but we are looking for a new government relations person. So yes, we do get involved in policy decisions. That being said, we're pretty selective at times, and we're not an advocacy group like NRCM. We definitely pick and choose our battles. So, yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.